Hello, good evening. Welcome to a Sunday system stream, super secret Sunday system stream, brought to you by the wonderful patrons of the Knights of Last Call. In particular, big shout out to John for his magnanimous tip, which kind of filled up this goal later last week. And John quickly requested another Fate stream. So here we are to talk about Fate. And, honestly, this famous last words, this might not actually be like our usual, 2 hour plus 3 hour plus stream, because today we're going to be talking about a special kind of Fate, a Fate which does what it says on the tin. The name of Fate, this particular version of Fate that we're going to be talking about tonight, is called Fate Accelerated. And I kind of want to talk about a couple of things before we get into it. But Fate Accelerated, as the name suggests, is very short. It's very quick. There's not a whole lot to cover. In fact, we'll probably be able to go through literally all the pages in the book. I think it's under 40 pages. So I've got the PDF ready. We'll pull that up. But I kind of want to talk about why I like this version of Fate so much. And which isn't to say that I dislike Fate Core, but we'll talk a little bit about Fate Core, Fate Condensed, and Fate Accelerated Edition, and why, in my particular instance, I prefer Fate Accelerated to Fate Condensed. And, then I can kind of talk about some of the, we could talk about the game, but the other thing I want to talk about is why I think this game is so powerful, especially for new players to tabletop role-playing games. Heyo!
London tip $10, sharing some news with the Colk fam. The family RPG party will be growing to 4. Found out this morning. Expecting early May 2024 and almost certainly no NightCon for me.
Well, you know what, buddy? Congratulations. I think that's a totally reasonably valid excuse to miss NightCon. Congratulations to you and your family. I know you've been putting a lot of hard work into your homestead, so it's seems like it only makes sense that you should increase the size of the bunch in order to share in the many blessings that you all have. So, congrats to you. Obviously, best of luck, and let us know how things are progressing. Hopefully, luckily London is a big play-by-post player, so hopefully that shouldn't interfere with you too much. You can still play in the middle of the night, but either way, buddy, this is for you. Speaking of your virility, of course. Very virile. Okay. So yeah, Fate Accelerated Edition, or FAE, is a very abbreviated version of the Fate game. But before we get into that, I want to talk about RPGs and some of the things that I have noticed when I play RPGs with people for the very first time. And then I also want to go a little bit of a rant on skills, and then we can get into Fate Accelerated Edition. Okay, so one of my earliest experiences with role-playing games was, let me share, teaching role-playing games. I was a young kid. I had played the black box basic version of the game, and I had started to play a sort of hybrid of first edition and second edition with my older cousin and my dad's youngest brother, who were both very instrumental in sort of getting me into gaming and the hobby and all this other stuff. And we used to go out there on the weekends, and there'd be like a table with like 12 or 14 players. It was crazy. I loved everything about it. And, I thought this game was amazing. I loved Dungeons and Dragons. And so naturally I wanted to teach it to some of my friends and to my younger sister and to, kids that I knew from the neighborhood. And so it was like, I was like, okay, I guess I have to be the dungeon master, right? I didn't really think about it till many years later that my initials are literally DM. But anyways, it just seemed like if I wanted to play, I had a game master, right? This is the same thing that, many people have sort of come into the how they came into the hobby as a game master, as a dungeon master over the years. But in this case, this was like, 11 or 12-year-old me doing this. And So I was pretty excited, and I would sit people down, and again, this is probably something I never really reflected on until many years later. But I would sit people down, and I would try to explain to them how to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I mean, they seemed to sort of kind of understand it at a primitive, basic level. But inevitably, I would always run into a situation where, I would sort of be describing something that was happening in the game, and the classic is like, the enemy attacks you. I describe, an orc, is charging at you with your axe. And I just found so many times over the years that new players want to go, okay, I want to jump out of the way. And you go, well, no. I'm going to roll dice and it's going to hit you. And that's your armor class. And that's sort of the difficulty to hit you. People would go, oh, okay. And then people would say, I kind of want to do this thing. And back then, I would tell people, look at your character sheet. What does it say you can do? And people would take a look at their character sheet and see what skill or what ability they had on their character sheet. And of course, to a certain extent, this makes some amount of sense. In real life, we're not all perfectly skilled at everything. And more importantly than that, Dungeons and Dragons as a game was sort of built on this kind of concept of, sort of niche and niche protection. If, the fighter had access to the best weapons and armor in the game, they had the best hit points. So if a fighter, was also good at doing certain skills or doing certain abilities, then it sort of diminished what some of the other character classes might bring to the table. So there was this need to sort of, I guess you could say, hamstring certain character classes because you wanted to carve out room for other character classes. But this is kind of where it goes into a rant here. But one thing that I certainly noticed many years later, but when 3rd edition D&D came out, and I guess you could say it happened earlier with 2nd edition with skills and powers, but I noticed in 3rd edition that games that I had grown up playing had become far less, how can I put this, creative. And more people, when I would ask them, when I had new players, brand new players, they never looked at their sheets, right? They would just come up with an idea and we could just go with it. But as we moved into 3rd edition and you suddenly had climb, search, spot, listen, use rope, no direction, arcana, more and more, I found that people weren't being creative. I would ask them what they wanted to do, and they would look down at their sheet. And they started looking at what things or skills were listed on their character sheet. And it sort of started to foment in my head, but it really kind of came to a head when I started playing the first like Powered by the Apocalypse games and some of that other stuff during like sort of the later, 2000s. And when I realized that playing those games with people suddenly felt like a lot of that creativity had come back. Now, the reason I kind of wondered why this was, and I realized it's because on the surface, skills are telling you what your character can do. But I counter that skills are a way of telling your character or telling you, the player, what your character can't do or what they cannot do. If there are 20 or 30 different skills in the game and your character has 5 of them, it's another way of saying you can't do those other 25 skills. Or at the very least, you'll be very, very bad at them and have a bad time experience with them. Now, of course, this problem is compounded in games such as Pathfinder 2nd Edition because the math and the base logic of the game is built around in other words, the progression of DCs are all based around characters that are trained or expert or master or whatever in a given skill. So this means that not only is the logic of the game built around skills, but it also means that it's based around the idea that you need to be good at this thing. You need to actually have a lot of points into it in order to even have a chance of succeeding. And so to a certain extent, I can't blame characters, or I can't blame PCs for looking down at their character sheet and thinking, have this thing tell me what I can do. Because technically, yes, this is Dungeons and Dragons. This is Pathfinder. You can do whatever you want to do. Okay, but not really, right? We all know that. So the game is really about figuring out which one of the 5 things that you have, and boom, that's the thing that you roll. And anything else is kind of not really worth it, or not really a great option. And so again, skills not only reward you for just doing the one thing, but the other thing that I realized is skills are all about telling you what. They're all about telling you what you are doing. It's sort of an outcome-based approach, right? It's focusing, they always talk about don't focus on the destination, right? Enjoy the journey. Skills, in my opinion, are all about the destination. They don't care how you get there. They just care, do you get there, yes or no? In other words, it's really focused on the what. What can you do? And that makes sense to a certain extent when you want your game to be very focused on that kind of almost transactional simulationism, right? Where you basically want to know, like, what list of knowledges are in your character's brain? What can they do? What skills are sort of slotted into your character build? And all we really care about is outcome. What can you do? What can you do for me? But again, going back to those experiences that I had with newer players, younger players, is they weren't thinking in terms of skills. They were just bringing cool ideas to the game. They were bringing interesting, creative solutions. The difference was that the game was kind of punishing for them for that if they didn't have the right option. And as time has gone on, and I have been introduced to other game systems like the 2D20 system or Legend of the Five Rings, 5th edition, not 5th edition Legend of the Five Rings, which is called Adventures in Rokugan, but and games like it, I've realized that I don't really care as much about the what. What I really kind of care about is the why, or the how. In other words, I'm less concerned. I mean, we have a game to play, so I'm not saying that there shouldn't be mechanics. But what I've realized is I'm not really as concerned about whether or not your character is good at climbing or not, right? That's the what. Can they climb? Yes or no? That's not interesting to me. What's more interesting to me is understanding the character's motivation and understanding the character's desire to accomplish something, and understanding what kind of situations is a character best at. And, I'll kind of talk about a couple of different options, but one of the things that Fate Accelerated Edition does, and again, it mechanically, let me point out something here. Mechanically, it actually doesn't make it's actually identical to Fate Core. That's actually like the super secret sauce, is that Fate Core and Fate Accelerated are actually exactly the same, but it uses different language, and it sort of frames them in a different way to sort of make it feel more open. And I'm a big fan of that. But there are other games that do this, and they do it pretty well. But they usually come with a fairly thick, heavy, scary rule book, or there's a lot of numbers or whatever. There's a lot of different baggage that comes with the game, and it's difficult. It could be very overwhelming from both a player perspective and from a game master perspective. Where again, with Fate Accelerated Edition, you are talking about a 35-page rule book that's free, okay, very free, okay, and that is a very low bar to entry to get people interested in playing your game. But more than that, I think that Fate Accelerated Edition sort of has the easiest option to sort of get new players to take advantage of their naivete. And rather than sort of have them be like, kind of mold them, the bright young student comes to school and you have to mold them into the, the form of the system. No, you can't do that. You don't have a skill for that. No, you can't do that for a skill for this. Instead, it sort of embraces that open creativity. And I think because of the nature of Fate Accelerated Edition, which uses this idea of approaches, in other words, not what can you do, but how do you do it, I think lends itself to kind of automated role-playing. And when I say role-playing, I mean describing your character's actions in a way that is internally consistent to both the narrative, the world, and to your idea of the PC. In other words, it provides a very, very tactical way for new players to roleplay, because you basically say, I need to get through this door. Well, how are you going to get through this door? Well, I'm going to get through this door forcefully. Okay, great. That's the approach you're using, forcefully. So what does that look like? And I think people have an easier time of going like, oh, okay, I'm using force, so I bum rush it with my shoulder. But a character who says I'm getting through the door quickly or carefully or, is going to have a different description. And it just helps people paint that picture. But most importantly, it means that anybody can get through that door. What really, the only thing that's sort of holding you back is, do you have a great, or do you have a way to describe what you're doing? And this is sort of that, what's true in the fiction should be true in the mechanics and vice versa. Fate doesn't go quite as far down this line, but I should point out that the Fate system, as it exists, is sort of derived from various prior systems like Fudge. Games like Powered by the Apocalypse and games like Blades in the Dark, Fate predates those. So a lot of these ideas that came into those games actually had their origin in Fate. So I think that is, probably one of the strongest applications of the game. All right, we got some chats. I just want to kind of go through here. Chats here. We got a bunch of people here. Ben is here, drinking beer, drawing dungeons, listening to Derik. Should be a good night. All right, hopefully. I hope you have fun for this. Frosty is in here. What's up, Frosty? Great to see you in here. We do love the Sunday streams. Thank you, Casey. Let's see. Over under on Derik's little rant. Probably over, but it could be. I think we have a chance here. Let's see here. John talking about some of the mechanical details of the game. Approaches are better when characters are roughly equal in ability. It's not even so much that, again, I'm not interested in, especially with newer players, I'm not interested in niche protection. I really am not. Because I think niche protection becomes more of an issue when you start to have players who are, quote, really good at the game, and they start trying to build and optimize. And so you want to force them to be unable to handle every situation. And that is reflected by having skills that are good and skills that are bad. And so that kind of forces people to rely on other characters and allows sort of the spotlight to be sort of mechanically enforced to be shared. But when I'm playing with new players or really good players, I'm not as worried about that. I'm more interested in giving them a cool platform in order to help them sort of create collaboratively a story experience. Ben, this is why I love Call of Cthulhu. By the way, Ben did send me a message. I have to read it, Ben, about his schedule of availability, because I would like to go have our Call of Cthulhu stream here, hopefully soon. It has a base chance of success for every skill in the game, plus luck spends and being able to push a roll. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that I hate skill systems. Let me be clear about this. In fact, one of my favorite game systems, Legend of the Five Rings, has a skill system in it. But there's a reason why I really like that skill system, because in Legend of the Five Rings, your character chooses a approach, which uses one of your 5 rings: air, earth, fire, water, and void. And that tells you how many ring dice you roll. So if I have if my approach is to be very logical and very calm and measured, that is an earth-based approach. And so I would look at the earth, my character's earth ring, and I say, oh, I have an earth ring of 3. So I'm going to be rolling 3 black earth ring dice. But there's also a skill involved. In this case, perhaps I am trying to, convince a local daimyo that they should aid us in our attempt to bring these rogue samurai to justice. And so I am being very deferential. I am being very courteous. And so I'm going to use my courtesy skill, which maybe is 3 as well. So now I'm going to add 3 white skill dice to my roll. So 3 black ring dice and 3 white skill dice. But in Legend of the Five Rings, even though I'm rolling 6 dice, the most dice that I can keep is 3 because that's what my ring dice is. In other words, if my approach was only 1 ring die and 5 skill dice, I still only get to keep 1 die. And so the skills don't really make it so that you're that much better than everybody else. In fact, you could have no skill in a role, in an ability, and still try it, because if your approach is a good one, just using your ring dice will be more than sufficient. Certainly, skills do give you sort of, more consistency and give you a chance for better, sort of results. But they really kind of bring up the floor. They don't really increase the ceiling. It's not like, there's like some TN that you just can't possibly hit. It's like, no, like technically, if you roll 5 ring dice, you could get 5 successes. And if you roll 5 ring dice and 5 skill dice, the most you could still get is 5 successes. So the ceiling is kind of capped in that way. And so I think that's something that I really like about that system. Ben, which I cannot confirm or deny because I haven't gotten to Call of Cthulhu yet, says that Call of Cthulhu has a similar sort of, well, maybe not similar, but the idea is that there's like this base level of success and, of course, additional abilities in order to try to make your character have a wider range of abilities. Let's see here. Bob's here, but not for long. I swear Bob has just been so busy lately. I feel like I never even see him anymore. Until now, what was your go-to RPG to introduce people into the hobby? Was it one game, or would you choose based off that person's taste? Well, that's the other thing I want to talk about Fate is, and this is sort of like the real tea, because obviously it's short and it's simple and it's sweet. And we'll get into that here. But the other thing about it is I find it to be specifically Ben being contrarian.
Bennett tipped $5. I know this is supposed to be for newbies, but I find dog/diff easier for new players to grasp than FA, since it's easy to understand that a bigger die equals more importance. Thoughts?
So this kind of gets into what I was just about to say, Ben, which is I agree that Dogs in the Vineyard, I think, actually does have a sort of, it's a relatively grokkable thing. Bigger die, bigger importance. That makes total sense. But whether it's Call of Cthulhu or Dogs in the Vineyard or any of these, the problem is, and this is actually the problem I've run into with Dogs in the Vineyard, not that I played it a ton, but when I've seen it available in like indie games on demand, and I'll get a pod together and I'm just a player, and a GM will come in and say, hey, what game do you guys want to run? And someone might suggest Dogs in the Vineyard. I've suggested it before, and I find that it doesn't get a lot of traction. And the reason is people just don't like the theme. They don't like the genre. They don't like the sort of weird religious Old West. And that, I think, is the real final nail in the coffin for me of why Fate Accelerated Edition might be the perfect game for bringing new people into the hobby. Because there is no Fate Accelerated Edition is completely generic. There is no presupposed setting. There is no presupposed world. And so what I have done in the past when I have run this for new people who are getting into the hobby is usually it's a group of people I know. And what I will do is I will make a quick Fate accelerated hack of something that they really love. Some sort of, I've run Harry Potter inspired games. Okay. I've run, My Little Pony inspired games. I have run, I'm trying to think of, I have simplified and hacked the system to basically, if you wanted to, and nowadays everyone loves Disney, you could hack it and create, Kingdom Hearts, and people could come in and make their favorite Disney characters. And what you're doing there is you're giving them the sort of buy-in because they say, oh, this is something I'm familiar with. This is something I'm interested in. This is something I want to play. And then you prevent them with a game system that kind of mostly gets out of the way. And so that is why Fate Accelerated Edition for me is sort of the real big winner, is because if I'm the game master and I'm trying to bring in some new people and have them have a first RPG experience, especially a bunch of people who've not really played any RPG experience, not only do I want to give them a very easy, light mechanical experience, but I also want to make sure that it's something that they are going to sort of instantaneously grok to. If I know that it's a bunch of Star Wars or Star Trek, fans or nerds, I can, quickly throw together a sort of Star Trek or Star Wars game hack. And I think that is what makes it so powerful as a tool to get people interested in role-playing games, because it's taking something that they love and they've already had a ton of experience with, and then sort of marrying it with the awesomeness of, sort of collaborative storytelling that we get out of role-playing games. Excuse me. So those are my thoughts on that. So let's take a look at Fate Accelerated. So it says only $5, but you don't really have to pay that much money. And Fate Accelerated is again a very, very simple and basic role-playing game. And let's, we can, again, it's the whole book is only 44 pages long and pretty simple and easy and quick to sort of run through, along with the basics of the game. I should also note before we get into this here that, let's see here, Fate, there we go. Fate Accelerated, there we go. The character sheet is likewise pretty dang simple. Not a whole lot going on there. And again, pretty simple and easy to sort of understand. All right, so Fate Accelerated Edition. So what do you need now? Look, we're all about honesty here, so I will be completely honest. Which is, I usually have some here. Here we go. There is one major drawback as far as I am concerned. There's only one major drawback as far as I am concerned with Fate Accelerated Edition. It's the same problem I have with Fate in general. Again, I don't have a problem with it, but it is a problem for some people. And that is this. This is a, this is a Fate die. And it has two sides that are blank, two sides that are a minus, and two sides that are a plus. And these are called Fate dice, or fudge dice is what I still call them, because that's what they were originally from. And while you can easily replicate these with a D6, where a 1 or a 2 is a negative, and a 3 and a 4 is a blank or a 0, and a 5 and a 6 is a plus or a +1. I do feel like it is worth investing in these, because it makes the game a lot simpler, quicker, and easier. Each person ideally has 4, although it is easy enough to sort of share around the table. But I find that minimizing the amount of math that people have to do, because the biggest number that's going to come out of your dice is 4. And quite frankly, most of the time it's going to be like between +2 and -2. And so it's just a little bit easier visually to just sort of say, oh, I got 3 pluses and a minus. So my total is +2. These are available at most hobby stores. You can certainly buy them on Amazon, but it's not something that everybody just has laying around. But in theory, if you're playing this with a group of new people who've never played RPGs before, it's just, if Fate Accelerated Edition is one of your go-to things, like for me, I have just like 6 sets of different fudge dice that I just use with different colors, just to kind of, have in my back pocket just in case I need to pull one of these games out. So again, I think that is probably the only sort of problem with this system. But again, you need some dice, you need 3 to 5 people, you need your character sheets, you need some index cards or post-it notes, and then you also just need tokens for your fate points. But this could be anything. This could be poker chips, this could be beads, this could be pennies, anything that you need that you can use in order to sort of track what how many fate points people have. So then, the little pamphlet tells you about like, what does it mean to tell stories together, and what's a PC, and all the stuff that we would normally expect to sort of come out of these games. And then it goes into, deciding and sitting down. So that's the other thing about that. It's like, I don't want, here's the problem. I'm not going to, okay. I'm a statistician. It is essentially a D3, but like nobody wants to do 43 minus 8, right? So like it's a little wonky to have to come up with things. That's why I just like using the Fate dice. John says, in Fate Core, they jokingly tell you not to use Skittles or something so you don't end up eating your fate points. Nutrimancer bringing out that most VTTs nowadays have fudge dice now. Anyways, not something I would even have thought of because I just don't really think about that. Most digital dice rolls support 4-5. Beowulf, good luck. Hopefully we'll see you back here. Again, I don't know that this stream is going to go extremely long. This is not a super deep system, but so it's really also talking about why I think this game is not only good for new players in the sense that it's a low barrier to entry, but I also think it's good, in my opinion, at teaching the kind of concepts that I think, me personally, think are valuable and useful skills that I want to see in more gamers. So it talks about who do you want to be and what kind of character do I want to play? And rather than focusing, and again, this part is the exact same as Fate Core, but rather than focusing on a character class and having to go through the book and having to, go through, understand what a class is and how many hit points, we skip all of that. We completely skip all of that. And we use this idea of aspects. And an aspect is a word or a phrase or a sentence that describes something that is core or central to your character. And one of the things I love about Fate Accelerated, pretty sure Fate Core does this as well, is there's room for 5 aspects, right? But you only need to fill in 2 to start the game. And Fate Accelerated Edition will even tell you that you can basically leave the other 3 blank. And if somebody comes up with a cool idea for an aspect of their character while you're playing, maybe that first session or maybe that second session, assuming it kicks off, just let them write the aspect in. Let them come to it later. So, what the big ask is for a new player is figuring out what is your character's core identity or their high concept, and what is their character's trouble. And this is where, rather than focusing on mechanics, which again, I think are cool and useful. I like gamey games, right? Fate Accelerated Edition is not the highest G score in the world. In fact, it's fairly low. This is, for me, an RPG that is not about teaching people how to make a up how to make a sick character or about how to make a cool build. This is really getting into the root idea of role-playing games, which is, who is this imaginary character? And what I have found, and I've done, the reason I've done Fate Accelerated at work, not my current job, but my past job when I worked for Progressive Insurance, and I ran maybe six or seven different RPG events as team building exercises, and I did them for another team, and I was part of like a sort of an analyst like sort of fun group. Anyways, and so I ran this several times for people who basically had limited to no experience with role-playing games. And I distinctly recall how well this worked with people who had never played role-playing games before. Whereas I've also seen the opposite. When I've sat people down and I'm like, we're going to play D&D. And I go, okay, there are 13 classes. There are fighter, there's rogue, there's wizard, there's cleric. Now, cleric is this, and a wizard casts spells, but you need to know about spells first. There's also the ranger, but also the barbarian, and it's like people's head explodes. When I sit down and I say, hey, everyone knows Harry Potter. Okay, we're going to run a Harry Potter game. And I say, okay, who is your character at Hogwarts? And they basically say, I'm a fifth year Ravenclaw, seeker for the Quidditch team. Cool. Perfect. That's your high concept, right? If someone writes in, I'm a clumsy, bumbling first year who comes from a really famous wizard family. Cool. That's your character's high concept. And rather than focusing on mechanics, which are again, are a fine thing. I like games that are crunchy. But when you're playing with people and I want to really sort of have them understand why role-playing games are different than, let's say, sitting down and playing a board game, sitting down and having that conversation about what is your character's core identity and what is your character's trouble? What is the thing that sort of is, causing a problem for them? And understanding, and again, I'm getting ahead of Fate Accelerated Edition here, is, Fate Accelerated says you want to create a high concept. Who is your character? What is your deal? And this part right here, when you think about your character's high concept, try to think of two things: how this aspect could help you and how it might make things harder for you. Good high concept aspects do both. This, again, is sort of getting players into the idea, the mindset of, hey, this particular game isn't necessarily about, I know RPGs aren't about winning. Okay, guess what? Some of them are. Okay, D&D, Pathfinder, those are games about winning, because there's definitely a way to lose and there's definitely a way to win. And this idea of making an aspect that sort of has two sides to it, I feel like that just does such a good job of getting players into a mindset where they stop thinking about beating the game and they start thinking about creating a cool story with the group as a collaborative exercise. And again, when I'm sitting down to play people with role-playing games for the first time, look, there's plenty of examples of where they're going to learn how to do super crunchy, awesome, builds and stuff like that. What I want to sort of get them exposed to is this idea of collaborative storytelling using a mechanical structure. And that is why I think Fate does such a good job of this. And then trouble, decide on something that always gets you into trouble. It could be a personal weakness. It could be an enemy. It could be an important obligation, anything that makes your life complicated. And again, if you are using a universe or an IP that people are really, really familiar with, they are going to have an easy time coming up with a high concept and a trouble. And again, there's room on your sheet for 3 more aspects. They say that, you should create another one and then maybe 1 or 2 optionally. But I think that the other 3 are optional as well. I think if you could just give people these 2, and then if they want to come up with another 1 or another 2, that's fine. They can leave them all blank and come up with them during the course of the game. And in fact, I think that is amazing and awesome as well. Because then it's like people are constantly in this process of dynamically creating the world as they play it. And I think that's really, really, really fun. So again, write 2 aspects for your character, a high concept and a trouble. write another aspect. Again, I say optionally. Give your character a name and appearance. Name is obviously important. Appearance, sure. Like I'm not asking people to go all out here, but maybe give me something unique about your character. And then you choose your approaches, and we'll get to this right now. So you'll notice that on this character sheet, there is no skills. Instead, this uses this idea of approaches. And if you've heard me talk about Legend of the Five Rings on this, live stream before, you'll know that one of the things I love about Legend of the Five Rings is that the game system, and this is also something I love about 2D20, games like Dune and Star Trek Adventures, is I love this idea of not just focusing on the what, but the how or the why. Dune 2D20 really focuses on the why. When you make a roll in Dune 2D20, it's not just about what you're doing. It's also about like why you are doing it. Are you doing it because of loyalty, or are you doing it because of faith? Are you doing it because of ambition? What element, and like from a simulationist standpoint, this doesn't even make any sort of sense. But the fact is that if your character is someone who is very ambitious, then if that is the core motivation for why they are doing a skill in this game, they are going to be more successful. Fate Accelerated uses this idea of approaches. In other words, it's sort of taking more of the how do you do something. Note, there's nothing on this sheet that says whether your character is good at hiding or good at climbing trees or good at fighting. The only thing it asks is, what are you good with? How are you doing it? Are you being clever? Are you being careful? Are you being flashy, forceful, quick, and sneaky? And again, I said before, it's kind of a cop-out because this is literally the same thing basically as Fate, which uses skills. But you could just erase the skills and write careful, clever, flashy, forceful, quick, and sneaky. But it is a mindset shift to be thinking about how you do something instead of what can you do. I should also point out that I could very easily hack Fate Accelerated right now. This is something I also done before, where you get rid of. I tried to find an example, but it's been so long, so I couldn't find it. But you don't need to have 6 approaches. For example, let's say I wanted to create a really, really simple version of Legend of the Five Rings. Now, I said before that Legend of the Five Rings uses the 5 elements to sort of represent the approach that you take in order to solve an issue. Fire is very creative and dramatic and forward, and you are, imposing your will. Water is much more yielding and accommodating and sort of going with the flow. Air is very tricky and conniving. It doesn't really want to be pinned down. Earth is a very solid, logical, rational based approach. And void is really more about sort of relying on sort of your gut instinct, your spirituality, your awareness of the needs of the universe. I could hack this Fate Accelerated and change the approaches out, get rid of all 6 of these, and put in earth, air, fire, water, void. And suddenly now we have 5 approaches, and when we can talk about what each element means. With the group, especially if they're sort of fundamentally sort of aware of sort of maybe, these kind of Eastern ideas about what elements mean and how they come into play. And suddenly we've created this Legend of the Five Rings Fate Accelerated hack that uses the same basic idea. In fact, it's probably, and then here's the best part, by the way, if I want something with a little bit more mechanical crunch than maybe Fate Accelerated offers us, and I want to get my players, this potentially new group of people, and I want to get them into a game like Dune 2D20, or I want to get them into a game like Legend of the Five Rings, then this provides a great way that I can hack this and change them to kind of mirror what the kind of goal game is. And it's a really nice stepping stone, but it gets there by going through sort of the narrative gates rather than the mechanical gates, rather than the, builds and classes and all of the minutia. So I really, really like approaches just in general, as an element to building a character. I thought we had some nice chats here. Let me kind of go back here and check this thing out here. Nutramancer says, I love coming up with an aspect in the middle of a role. Making it a flashback can be even cooler. Absolutely. And I've definitely seen people have this really cool moment, because when you are playing with new players and it's an IP that they understand, then the one thing that's been missing of their love for, say, Harry Potter, they've read the books, they've watched the movies, they've maybe even played the video games, but the one thing that they couldn't do was sort of make the story theirs. And when you're in a moment and they're able to sort of call upon their game lore and they say, oh, what if my character is actually kind of best friends with some house elves? Or, because I was a founding member of Spew. And if you're playing with a bunch of Harry Potter fans, they're all going to know what Spew is and what a house elf is. But when that player makes that sort of world character mechanic connection and writes down that aspect onto their character sheet, it can feel very empowering, and they can suddenly feel like the story that they are playing is their story, not just a story that I'm going through. And I think that's really, really, really cool. See here. Rules-lite RPG plus well-known IP equals great introduction to RPGs. And Ben, I completely agree with you. In fact, again, one of the reasons why, even if you go back to the beginning of this channel, we did one of our top performing videos was 5e versus PF2. What games? And I basically said neither. I wouldn't use, if I was introducing someone to role-playing games, I wouldn't use either of those game systems. I would use something that, again, is rules-lite and that I can either hack or change into something that is very, very relatable to this particular group of people. And I have found that time and time again, this is the most powerful introduction to role-playing games. I did this at the beginning of Knights of the Last Call, although we didn't know it was Knights of the Last Call yet. Bob wanted to learn how to play role-playing games, specifically D&D. And he wanted to, he had played, watched some Critical Role, he had seen some of the games, but he didn't really understand what was going on. And he came to me and he said, hey, can you run me a D&D campaign? And I said, sure. He's like, I don't really even know what D&D is. I've kind of not really paid attention too much to the show. And I said, okay, you know what, Bob, fine. And Bob, with his kids and Disney, and Bob's a Disney dad. And I said, Bob, you like Disney, right? You know Disney. He's like, yeah, okay, great. And we off the cuff, I made a pseudo RPG, literally in seconds. And it was a Fate accelerated game. And Bob's first experience was playing in this kind of Disney-fied hack that I literally made in probably less than 5 minutes. And I honestly, I'm not trying to be like, oh, I'm so good. It really captured his attention. And I think that, where Bob's willingness to, kind of help me start this whole thing came about because he had such a positive experience with that first role-playing game. Something I talk about a lot on this channel is how I don't like initiative rolls in combat, especially in, your traditional D&D combats, because nowadays the initiative rolls are more horrible than ever. I can... Hey, tip from our good friend Ben. All right, what is he?
Ben tipped $5. All-purpose tip for the excellent Build-A-Bear example of how to make a great hack in 2 minutes.
Right, exactly. That's why this can be, such a powerful tool, is because when you look at this character sheet, it's like, oh, this isn't anything. But if I suddenly were to put aspects in here like, devoted battle brother of the emperor, and, trouble is like, I'm haunted by, a tyrannid swarm lord, I have just made this character into a Warhammer 40K Space Marine. If I then change my high concept to, erstwhile young magician apprentice, and my name is Mickey Mouse, and my trouble is, have, spells get out of control, suddenly I have created the Sorcerer's Apprentice and we're playing Disney. And I haven't changed anything else about the game, but the feel of it and how players will respond and react to it, I think is dramatically different. And I think that is extremely powerful. Let's see. Nutromancer says, I find that Fate can do long campaigns fine, but most people end up wrapping up and moving on to another story because sticking to the same cast forever gets old. I personally this is just me, I don't know that I would want to play Fate for a very long time. The longest Fate game I ever did was our fourth superhero RPG was done using Fate, and it probably ran for somewhere around 20 sessions. And I do remember feeling that there was sort of a lack of progression that is something that I personally like, and to a certain extent in role-playing games. I don't think there's anything wrong with, leveling up and getting stronger. I just don't think it should be your primary motivation. And so I did find it to be a little bit frustrating. But to be fair, there are systems that I absolutely adore. Blades in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse. I don't think you should be playing those games for 20 plus sessions either, just because of the way that the advancement system in that game does work. And John here talking to Nutromancer, but says Fate is meant to be hacked to your needs. I love how easy they make it to do so, to the point where Fate, and John and I gave away some of these. John was very gracious, gave away some Fate books when we talked about it earlier this year. Fate, not only does it have a core rule book, it actually has a book called the Fate System Toolkit. And it is literally a book solely dedicated to, here are ideas and ways to hack this game, to make it fit for your express and specific idea. Yeah. Ben, identifying, very true. One of the biggest problems with rules-lite games, limited player investment in their character over the long haul, character hitting a ceiling much quicker than in a more robust game. I absolutely agree with you, Ben. And that's for me personally as well. I enjoy some of these games a lot because of the mechanics, but, and to be clear, part of the reason I've come to enjoy games like Powered by the Apocalypse and stuff more as I've gotten older is because, there was a time and a place where I used to be able to play D&D 2 or 3 times a week, and that kind of 60, 70, 80, 100 plus sessions of the game became much more time management reasonable. Nowadays, the idea of investing even 20 or 30 sessions into a game, you're talking about that might be more than a year or 2 years sometimes, with the way that certain games get to the table. And so I find that I've been forced to sort of strike a balance and kind of identify those issues. So I completely agree with you. And one of my, I don't know what that world looks like. I don't know if I have to wait until all of my friends have kids or maybe in high school or off to college or something. But I long for the days where, me and my group can get together and have 5 or 6 or 7 hour sessions. Who knows? Maybe twice a week, 2 evenings a week, consistently every week. I mean, that's a big, huge dream for mine. I'm not salty about it, but it is something that I'm aware of. So you put problems in quotes, which I think is very accurate, because I think in some instances, what you're talking about here can be a strength of the game system. So, let's see here. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, just trying to. Ben saying that he did something similar with his Warhammer 40K PBTA hack, perfect for a one shot. And I saw Ben's Warhammer 40K PBTA hack. And again, what he did was essentially distill the essence of the game down into a very, very, very digestible 1-page version of the game rules that really essentially capture the essence of it. And essentially relying on a rules-lite framework and resonance, right? A term that we've talked about before. We start stealing that from Mark Rosewater over at Wizards of the Coast, but relying on your sort of innate knowledge or interest in a given IP and using that to your advantage. So rules-lite plus really good IP that people have a connection to or a relationship with is perfect for a one-shot, and I think perfect for a great game. And same. So Frostjack said, what are the most common things that you hack when you're doing a session for newer players? I mean, the nice thing about it is, so I'll be, we'll kind of get back into Fate here really quick, but the one thing that I typically hack is when I'm playing Fate Accelerated Edition is I don't roll any dice because I hate rolling dice, and Fate already supports the GM not rolling dice anyways. I do this because I really want the players to feel like they are the ones who are steering this ship. They are the ones who are driving it. So the most common hacks that I do is I get rid of me rolling any dice. And the second thing that I typically change is I do not really worry about the minutia of boosts versus sit aspects and free invokes. I find that just creates more problems than it's worth. I'm not saying that it's something that if you were legitimately going to use Fate Accelerated as a game and you wanted to play it for 5 or 10 sessions, even 3 sessions, I think these rules are totally understandable and totally grokkable and could be used easily. But when I am playing it with brand new players, I do not want to get into this describing what the boost is and what a free invoke is, and I don't really worry about that. So we'll get into that here. Because as rules-lite as this is, sometimes it's still not rules-lite enough. Let's see here. Ooh, Omrid is here. Hello, Omrid. Abdul is here. Says, just want to drop in and say hi. Hi, Abdul. Fate Accelerated was the first system I ever GM'd. It was fun, although I don't think I used fate points and invoking aspects particularly well. Totally reasonable. Let's see here. Right. The cool thing about Fate dice is that rolling 0 is kind of the default, so it makes it easy to make all NPCs roll 0 and it doesn't really break anything. Absolutely. So you have your approaches that you choose for your character. And again, rather than worry about esoteric concepts like strength and dex and how that connects to a given skill and a given attack bonus, you are instead just saying, hey, here are 6 approaches: careful, clever, flashy, forceful, quick, sneaky. Which of these is your character the best at? Pick one of them and mark it as being good. Give it a +3. Now, here's the other thing. This stupid little ladder here on the right-hand side, if you go back to like early versions of Fate or Fudge, like this was the adjectives were actually the default. Nowadays, most people just use the numbers. But I find that this is just another stupid thing that makes this game really, really good at understanding the game, because we play a bunch of D20. So we understand, we know what a D20 is. We know what the probability distribution is. We understand how AC scale. And so it's very easy for me to look at an 18 and see that it's +4 bonus and understand how much better that is than a +0 or a -1 or a +1 or something that's a +8. Is that really high? Is that good? I don't know. I don't know anything about this game. I know what numbers are, but I don't know how these numbers react to anything. In fact, the only way that anybody makes sense of it is somebody has to explain it to you. What this does is it says, hey, pick something that you're good at. Pick some stuff that you are fair at, fairly good. Pick a couple things that you're average, and pick one thing that you're mediocre at. And already off the bat, people have this strong connection to who this imaginary character is because of this stupid ladder, because it makes it very easy to understand who or what your character is. And if your character were to take their +3 and take it up to a +4, they would understand that they are now great at that thing. And that word is meaningless, but for people who've never played before, the numbers on the left mean nothing. The words on the right mean everything. And so that is, again, one of the reasons why I find that this just gets so much better traction with new people who've never played RPGs before. But again, you're going to pick 1 +3, 2 +2s, 2 +1s, and a +0. And you can put them in however you want to say. And again, I have found time and time again that when, if you take even a group of new players, people who've never played an RPG before, and if I were to ask them, hey, I want you using these words, okay, and the associated number, I want you to put the stats in for, let's say, Hermione Granger. And I think what you'll see is that, for the by and large, for the most part, especially for the first couple, people are going to put the same things as being really, really hot. They're going to say, oh, well, Hermione is good at being clever. She's fairly good at being careful and maybe sneaky. She's average at being flashy and quick, and she's maybe mediocre at being forceful. In fact, at home, I'm probably willing to bet that might have been how you would have built Hermione Granger as well, because we understand what she is, and we understand what these words mean, and we understand what these approaches mean. And so it's very easy to build Hermione Granger, even if you don't know anything else about the game system. In fact, I could get rid of these numbers and just give you these words and say, okay, you need to put 1 good, 2 fairs, 2 averages, and 1 mediocre into these 6 things. Build me Hermione Granger. And I think, by and large, you're going to get people who build the same thing. Okay. So then they go in to talk about stunts, and stunts are a kind of the Fates Accelerated's way of sort of defining your character. And you can start with up to 3. They recommend that you only choose 1 stunt to start with. And a stunt, by and large, gives you a +2 bonus, but only when a certain trigger or situation occurs. So we'll get to that when we talk about stunts, but this is the other aspect that I think of the game that kind of helps people feel like they are sort of building this new character inside of the game, is this approach of building stunts. Because in Fate Accelerated Edition, it follows a very formulaic process that I think has a lot of advantage. But again, the way a stunt works, and it talks about, we'll get to that on page 31, but you basically choose a certain approach with a certain action under certain circumstances. So, if I attack, maybe I'm a grade A Quidditch player. So, when I, attack, quickly, I get a +2 bonus when I'm on the Quidditch pitch, right? And it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So when I'm on the Quidditch pitch, I can attack things quickly because I'm a good Quidditch player. I'm a seeker. I'm a bludger or something. Anyways, not a bludger, a beater. Get my Harry Potter here macked up. All right. So the other thing is, how do you do stuff in Fate? So the 30-second version, describe what you want your character to do. See if someone or something can stop you. Decide what action you're taking. Are you creating an advantage? Are you overcoming? Are you attacking or defending? By and large, when I am teaching this to brand new players, I basically kind of combined overcome and attack into the same basic concept. I don't really, attacking means I'm attacking a person. Overcome means you're like attacking a challenge or a difficult thing. And again, in my game, I don't really roll dice. So if I were to describe that the Death Eater, begins casting his stunning spell and begins lowering his wand, and I ask, the player, like, what are you doing? Typically I'm basically giving them the opportunity. This is a little bit more like a kind of a Powered by the Apocalypse type approach, but I'm basically giving them the option to defend, and they have to describe, I quickly dive behind the nearby, table in the Great Hall to not get hit. And I'm like, okay, cool. So you're going to roll your quick approach with defend. And then we roll our dice. If we add the bonus from our stats for quickly, let's say we got a +2 or a +1. So we would add that. And then we can decide if we want to use our aspects. Fate Accelerated Edition also has partial success, basically. If you You fail if you get less than what you need to get. And again, as a GM, especially with new players, I like to tell them and I like to explain to them why it is. I'm like, hey, this is a Death Eater. This is a trained dark wizard. To dodge this, you're going to need at least a 2. Because it's difficult. It's tough, right? He's good at or he's fair or good or whatever at this action. So if you fail, if you don't get enough, you tie if it's equal. So if you get exactly what you need, you succeed if it's greater, and you succeed with style if it's at least 3 greater. And again, I don't really focus on this too much with new players, but it can be, again, a fun way to make the game, if you want to bring in that element of excitement from critical hits. This gets a little bit into why I skip boosts, but again, you can use them. I just don't use them like formally. I might just kind of use them on an ad hoc basis. So creating an advantage. This is the go-to catch-all thing in Fate Accelerated, because again, this is one of the reasons why I like this game, because aspects can be anything in this game. And so as a result, when a player gives a description of their action and it's not directly attacking the enemy, it's not directly trying to overcome the challenge, they're not trying to defend from some sort of incoming attack, 99% of the time, what they're actually trying to do is create an advantage. And this means that you as the GM, they don't have to worry about the mechanics. They can just describe what they're doing, and then you can say, "Great, awesome, all right." So you're trying to make Draco Malfoy be distracted so that you can sneak in, right? You're like, yeah, all right. You're creating an advantage. Go ahead and roll how you're doing that. You're like, well, you know what? I'm going to do that kind of sneakily, because I'm going to try to, slip some whatever, itching tonic into his pumpkin juice. And you're like, okay, cool. Roll with your approach. And then if you succeed, we will create a aspect. And this is where having note cards and writing them in big Sharpie and putting them out onto the table is very, very powerful, because what you do is describe how this character is changing the game world. This player at the table decided to put itching tonic into pumpkin juice of Draco Malfoy. This is something we do all the time. But when you're playing a role-playing game for the first time and your character succeeds at that, and the GM then takes this note card and writes on it, Draco is itching, and puts the note card down into the middle of the table, and then points to it and says, hey, all the rest of you, you can now interact with this. You can now use your fate points to sort of spend them to tag this aspect, or to use this aspect to get a +2 bonus on whatever you're doing. If Draco being distracted by all of his itching would be beneficial. And that's something that I think we don't need. There's no hard set of rules for this. This is Fate after all. We're just here, but the players begin to understand, okay, so why don't I just invoke this trait every single time and always get a +2 bonus? And that's where you get into this sort of narrative mechanical connection where you say, to do it, you have to do it. In order for you to be able to invoke it, it's not enough that you have a fate point that you can spend. You also have to be able to describe how that particular situation and that particular aspect helps you in this endeavor. And this creates a necessity for people to roleplay, to be creative, to add to the collaborative world. And I think, by and large, I have found that people find this very, very intoxicating, because it's a level of control. It's a level of ability to really shape the game that they are playing. It almost feels, in some cases, I've heard people say, I felt like I was cheating, like I was making up the rules to the game as we were playing it. And I think that's true to a certain extent. Again, there are more specific rules here for creating an advantage. Like, for example, if you tie you get a boost, and a boost is just a one-time aspect. In other words, you can invoke it once, you can use it once, and then it goes away. You can't keep using it over and over again. Whereas if you succeed, it's more permanent on the table, and multiple people can invoke it as long as they have the aspects. Okay, I don't get too caught up in these things when I am playing with new players. I basically just sort of, hey, you succeeded, and I'm going to put the aspect out there. Another thing that I tend to do, by the way, is because I do want there to feel like there's like sort of a difference between, just getting the result versus getting all the results. You'll note that in Fate Accelerated Edition, in order to invoke an aspect, which means because this particular aspect applies to what I'm doing, I can spend one of my fate points for my character's personal pool, and it'll give me a +2 bonus. However, when you create or discover a new aspect in the scene that you're in, it has this sort of free invoke. What I will tend to do is what I will do is actually take, let's say I use glass beads or poker chips to represent fate points, right? So, John has a stack of fate points. Ben has a stack of fate points. Maybe I'm using poker chips. So they've got 3 or 4 poker chips in front of them. Ben has 2. He's been spending a lot. When they create the aspect, Draco is itching. If they tie, again, I know this is like me house ruling it, but if they tie, I will write it down and put it onto the table. And I'll say, hey, you can invoke this. It'll cost 1 of your fate points. Again, this is different from the way that the game is actually written. But if they succeed, which means that they get more than they would require, or if they succeed with style, which means if they get really, really above the number that they were trying to get for, what I will do is I will take 1 or 2 or 3 of those poker chips and I will put them on the note card. And I will basically say, hey, you guys can invoke this a couple of times for free. It's like I'm spotting them the fate points. I'm not putting them into their personal pools. These fate points can only be used for this particular aspect. But because you did it so well, because you managed to dump the entire vial of itching potion into his pumpkin juice, you guys get 3 or 2 or 3 free invokes of this aspect, and it's not going to cost you anything out of your personal pool. We'll just take them off of the card. Whereas if they just tie, I just make it and I put it onto the scene, and the players understand, okay, we got it. But if we want to use it, we're going to have to pay out of our personal pools. And then again, if you fail, either you don't create the aspect, or you create or discover it, but an opponent gets to invoke the aspect for free. Again, what I tend to do here is I try to, make failure interesting. I try to make failure forward. Obviously, in some instances, they fail and it just doesn't work. But typically, when that happens, I will create a new aspect, or I will put a consequence onto that character, so it's like they got an aspect back, which you had to duck into the closet, and now you're trapped in the closet, right? So again, this create an advantage, in my opinion, handles like 50%. Like there's so much rules in like Pathfinder 2 that basically are just create an advantage, right? All the rules for grappling, all the rules for tripping, all the rules for pushing, all the rules for disarming, all the rules for recall knowledge, all the rules for on and on and on and on. It's really just create an advantage, and it's just 1 page. Let me get caught up here with chat here. Tristan, welcome to the stream. Major Fate fan here. Love the sliding scale of complexity. Accelerated for simple, condensed for a little bit more complex, core for even more, and strands of Fate for the most complex. Tristan, good shout out. I don't know if you mentioned, I don't know if you heard earlier, but I did say that I have run Fate many times, especially Fate Accelerated, but I did run a full length, about 20 or 25 long session superhero RPG. And we have sort of our own internal lore of our history of our superhero RPGs. It's like the same shared universe, but we've used different systems. We've used Mutants and Masterminds a ton. We've used Mutants and That's sort of our default edition that we used for a long time. But for our fourth volume, our fourth issue, we used Fate, and specifically we used Strands of Fate. So I am familiar with Strands of Fate, and I really liked it. Also, shout out to some of the OG Fate stuff. I'm talking about Legends of Anglaire. I am talking about Starblazer. Those are some of the old school Fate games, which I absolutely, completely, and totally loved. One of the first things I ever kickstarted was a Fate game by Galileo Games called Bulldogs, which I think was called like Sci-Fi That Kicks Ass or something like that. So Strands of Fate I am very familiar with. So welcome. Ben, of course, you and I are on the exact same page here. Shouldn't be a surprise here. I love how Fate achieves with aspects in one paragraph what 2D20 achieves with traits over 200 pages. Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, it's not just 2D20, Ben. It's so many games. And again, I get it. There's not the same level of subtlety and complexity and depth. And it's a plus 3.5 plus 2.75. I get it. But 90% of what you want, you get through just this anyways. And most of the time it's kind of all you need. So Von John says, you're not cheating. You're just bending fate. That's exactly right. My players and I love how your character's backstory and narrative were able to be used in a mechanical way. They loved how aspects and approaches allowed them to use the narrative of the scene. I agree with Ben. If you really like that, check out Broken Compass. Fantastic, exciting game. It's a game that I was really surprised at how well it was designed and how fun it is, and how well it emulates the genre of sort of pulp adventure. And it's definitely a game that I would love to get a chance to get to the table. But it does, I too, Tristan, love when characters' narrative and backstory aren't just what we call here at Knights of Last Call, Tristan, fluffy bullshit time, where, which, by the way, fluffy bullshit time is part of the reason people play role-playing games. But I'm saying, why can't, por qué no los dos? Why can't I have my cake and eat it too? Why can't I have cool elements about my character's backstory, but also have them be relevant in a narrative way that makes a difference, and mechanical way that makes a difference right here and right now. Lol, Starblazer. Now that's a throwback. Oh yeah. Starblazer Adventures I loved. By the way, that was like the first time I was like, my mind was opened to the idea of fractal fate. And I know I'm getting a little off topic here, but the idea of fractal fate is everything in Fate is a Fate character, right? Is this a PC? No, actually it's not. It's a starship. Actually, I lied. It's a galactic empire. Right? It's a planet. It's an army. It's a people. So the idea of fractal fate is the idea that aspects and skills, or aspects and approaches and stunts, could be used to kind of describe anything, right? What would be the approaches of the Empire, right? From Star Wars. Well, obviously forceful would be +3, right? Sneaky and quick, maybe not the most. Flashy, absolutely. What about the Rebel Alliance? Well, they're clever and they're sneaky, right? And you would give the Rebel Alliance different approaches than you would to the Empire, right? What would the Hutts get? Right? So that is where this idea of fractal fate comes in, which I think is what, at the time when I read it in like Legends of Anglaire and Starblazer Adventures, was like one of the classic meme of the guy's head exploding, because it was such an awakening moment to me. Let's see here. I would love a more in-depth look at how to build the setting and campaign in Fate, and nailing setting aspects, etc. Also the phase trio from Fate Core. Not now, but sometimes. I think there's a lot of great lessons to learn from Fate that, again, is it my favorite game system of all time? No, it is not. But I think that there are some tremendously valuable lessons here. And I think it, in the right place, in the right time, it can be very, very, very powerful. Is Fate the only successful generic system? I mean, it depends how you want to describe it. I mean, there's a legion of people who still swear by GURPS, and that was a pretty generic system. And people are out there playing now the Cypher system, and that's doing really well, and that's generic. The Genesis system, not as successful, but also generic. So, I mean, you could argue that D20 is kind of generic in its own way. So anyways, all right. So create an advantage does like most of what you want it to do. All right. Overcome is when you have a goal that you want to get past. Oh yeah, that is probably actually the number one most, successful, generic game of all time. Absolutely, Ben. At least in the modern context. I mean, if you go back to the 90s before Savage Worlds was really a thing, I would say GURPS, but, so Overcome. This is your classic, hey, my character wants to pick a lock. Hey, I want to escape from handcuffs. I want to leap across the chasm. I want to fly a spaceship through an asteroid field. But again, instead of worrying about, does my character have this right skill? Anyone can fly a spaceship through an asteroid field. The only difference is, how do you do it? And however you do it is going to affect your approach. And again, I get it. When you're playing with new players, by the way, you might get somebody who goes, I'm going to try to do it forcefully. I'm going to try to do it forcefully. And you're like, okay, how does flying your spaceship through an asteroid field forcefully? Sounds like it's going to be a really bad idea. The difficulty level is going to be 4. Okay. This is an optional rule in Fate Accelerated Edition, but or maybe it's not optional, but I think it's optional. But I do want to add that it is something that, for me, is one of the reasons why I love Legend of the Five Rings. Because in Legend of the Five Rings, when you are attempting to overcome an obstacle, or you are attempting to interact with, say, an NPC, the GM will decide before the player decides what approach they want to use, whether there is sort of an approach that is a good idea or an approach that is a bad idea. For example, I might know that this Lion Clan general hates people being very, facilitative and very, gracious. He feels like they're just being, slimy liars. He hates it when people take a water-based approach with him. He prefers people to be blunt, direct, and to the point, right? He wants people to, use the earth approach. So I know before my players roll that if they choose to use an earth-based approach, I'm going to make the DC or TN test number lower. Whereas if they try to use a water-based approach, then the TN is going to be higher. And so while it may be tempting for a player to just say, well, water's my best stat, I'm going to spam it, the fact of the matter is the math of the game is going to punish them at times because it's not going to be the best option for them to succeed. Now, it's possible that that character is so good at being, smarmy and smooth talking that even a character who's roughly, that's not, he hates people like that, you still might be able to win him over. And that's a cool moment for your character as well. But one thing that I really like about this idea is if somebody tries to fly their spaceship through an asteroid field and they say, I'm going to do it forcefully, I'm not going to say no. I'm simply going to go, okay, great. Well, your ship is this big and the asteroids are really big. It's going to be really, really tough for you to do that. So, by just blasting your way through it, and I'm going to make the difficulty number for this a 4 or a 3. And the player's gonna be like, okay. And maybe they succeed still too. And that can feel like such an awesome win. But what you're doing is I'm never going to say no. I'm basically going to let you use any approach for any skill or for any action. All I'm going to say is, what does that look like in the game, right? You can't just say forceful fly. What does forceful flying mean to you? And again, I think people have an easier time of describing forceful flying than if they were just to say, have the fly skill. And I said, oh, great, make me a fly check. And they go, sweet, awesome. And I go, what does that look like? And they go, I don't know. I guess I fly the plane. I don't know. What do you mean? What does it look like? Right. Whereas if they are forcefully flying the plane versus carefully flying the plane versus flashily flying the plane versus sneakily flying the plane, I think we all instantly and automatically have a different idea of what that looks like. Absolutely. Forceful flying is white knuckling it. You put the throttle to the max and you just say, I am just going to just zip through this asteroid field as fast as I can. I'm going to hold on to your butts. We're going to take some hits, right? And you're just going for it. Maybe I am totally fine with someone making that approach. Me as a game master, I'm like, that's probably going to have some more consequences. I'm going to make the level of difficulty for that higher than if a character maybe took something, maybe a little bit better or a little bit more nuanced. And so you're teaching players, hey, you can do anything in this game, but that doesn't mean that all ideas are the same and that all ideas are equally valid. Sometimes having a good idea or paying attention and reading the room, you are going to be rewarded with better success than if you just, spam whatever ability you think you want to use. So overcome, again, lets you do the thing. And by the way, I'll point out here, Fate Accelerated Edition, another great example of teaching people about fail forward mechanics. If you fail the check, you have a difficult choice to make. You can simply fail. The door is still locked. The thug still stands between you and the exit. The enemy spaceship is still on your tail. Or you can succeed, but at a serious cost. The GM will help you figure out an appropriate cost. And, this is sort of a hallmark or the basis of modern day kind of indie RPGs, right? Which is this idea of, yes, you failed, but I will let you succeed, but at a significant cost, right? All right, fine. You can get through the character says, I'm going to, I put the sublight drive to max and we just punch through this, and they roll the die and they fail. And I go, okay, well, you failed. So either you don't make it through the asteroid field and you're going to have to deal with the, Imperial fleet that's behind you, or I'll let you succeed, but the damage to the ship is considerable. The hyperdrive engine is cracked and needs significant repairs before you can make the jump to light speed. Do you agree? And if the player says yes, then cool. They've made their decision. They failed. And even in failure, they still got agency, right? And that's so important. Again, one of the reasons that people resonate with role-playing games is because it empowers them in a way that other media forms, particularly movies and books, don't, right? So again, I think this is really, really awesome, and I think this is a fantastic situation. Attack is, I'm going to beat him up, right? Swing a sword, shoot a rifle, hit him in the face. And this is fundamentally the same as Overcome. The only difference is if you are attacking somebody, technically, you have to track damage and stress and consequences. But to be honest with you, between me and you, if I'm playing this as sort of a one shot, I don't really worry about tracking consequences for my villains or my enemies. I kind of just say, hey, if they hit him twice, he goes down, or once they hit him 3 times, he goes down. If they hit him they really get a critical hit, I'll count that as 2. And if it's like, a mook or a minion, it's just like 1 hit, they're just down, right? Like I don't sweat it and I don't worry about it. And again, defend is when you're trying to stop somebody from doing something. So in my game, because I'm just making everything a test number, I really think of it more as like everything is either kind of overcoming or attacking. So if I describe that the stormtrooper is pulling out his gun and is starting to blast at you, what do you do? If the character says, oh, I'm going to try to dive out of the way and return fire, I don't really worry about the minutia of defending versus attacking. I just get into sort of the make one roll and judge from there based on their approach. And again, here's where they talk about choosing your approach. We've talked about this a long time, but in case you don't know what the words careful, clever, flashy, forceful, quick, or sneaky are, they go ahead and describe them here. You roll the dice, you add your bonus, and then you decide whether you want to modify your roll. I tell people whether they hit or miss. I don't wait for them because, again, I tell them what the test number is, the DC number, before they roll. So if they get a total and they know they need a 3 and they get a 1 or a 2 after they've rolled the dice and add their bonus, they know that if they invoke an aspect, they will get the success that they need. The only thing is they have to have a fate point to do it, and they have to make that invocation make sense, right? And I like that. I think that, again, feels empowering to the player. This is mostly just game syntax and nomenclature. A challenge is basically like a bunch of skill checks in a row. Not even necessarily in a framework, like some sort of ordered structure, clock, skill point system. It's more of just saying like, hey, the ship is sinking. What do you all do? Right. And, you're kind of just looking for them to do a bunch of overcome and create advantages in order to try to mitigate the circumstance. And you don't necessarily have to have a formal framework for this. Heck, eventually, if the characters do enough to escape, you just say, yeah, you managed to escape. You managed to get off of the sinking ship. And of course, there's also conflicts and contests. Contests are when you, just one-on-one. I don't know why they have rules for this, but conflicts are fights, basically, for lack of a better word. But it could also be a tough interrogation or a shouting match, right? Fate doesn't really care about the distinction between, fighting with words or fighting with steel. All right. What else here? Stress and damage and consequences. This is one of those things that I think is more complicated than it needs to be. But long story short, when they attack, when a player gets hit, you'll say that they take a certain number of points of damage. And they can check the stress boxes to absorb that much damage. And if they don't want to, or they can't, they have to take a consequence instead. So for example, if someone's stress boxes were all filled up and I dealt 3 damage to them, they would be forced to take a moderate consequence. And again, this is just a way that me and the players can describe things narratively. And stress is sort of just described as sort of, grit, luck, toughing it out. I don't want to take an actual physical consequence. But if the stormtroopers are shooting at you and you get blasted in the chest and, you're like, I don't want to get taken out, I'm going to take a consequence, moderate. And you're just like, that's like when Leia gets shot in Return of the Jedi, right? A severe consequence might be, Luke loses his hand, right? Fighting Vader. I think, again, players, have a really strong connection to this more than they do hit point damage. Writing down that consequence onto their character sheet and connecting it to what happened in the narrative, and the fact that, their enemies can now invoke that against them, even though it gives them fate points, which could theoretically make them feel better about it. It still feels like it feels more visceral and real in a way that I don't think hit points ever truly do. My experience, new players really react to getting a consequence. So the last aspect of Fate is this idea of fate points. Now, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I have run Fate Accelerated Edition before without fate points. And again, I treated the players as having infinite fate points, right? And basically, if they could point to an aspect on their character sheet or on the table in the form of a note card, and all I'm trying to get them to do is think inside the narrative. Okay? That's it. And if they're doing that, I consider that checkbox big win, right? And I'm not as worried about them, having compels and invokes and earning fate points. I get it. That is a cool part of the game. It ties into this meta narrative concept. But I know this sounds crazy, but honestly, I don't think you need it when you're playing, especially if you're playing with new people. No, now, John, you're right. There is no reason to accept a compel. But you know what I've found? The players don't need one. They will accept the compel anyways, right? Because in their mind, when they have infinite fate points, even though they don't think of it as having infinite fate points because they just don't have any, they're like, look how cool this thing is for me. It keeps giving me +2s. I love it. But then when I say, don't you think this causes you some trouble? Most players would feel like, yeah, you know what? Tit for tat. It's fair game. I mean, I've gotten so much use out of it. It only makes sense that it's going to cause me problems. I agree with you. From a meta narrative, like using the mechanics of the game in a kind of fictional reinforced way, what gets rewarded gets repeated, et cetera, et cetera. But in my experience, again, John and Neutromancer, you all are thinking about it from the perspective of gamers, right? You're thinking of it from the perspective of people who are either veteran RPG players who are trying to win, or you're thinking about it even from people who might just be more of a gamer, maybe not role-playing gamer, but they're more of a board gamer or video gamers. I have played, and you say, yeah, I got to have a certain quality players for that to work. I actually disagree. I think people who have played before, this idea doesn't work. But people who have never played a role-playing game before and have basically never played games before, I find that it doesn't matter. They are thinking about it in terms of because I've gotten to them to the point now where they are just thinking about, does this make sense for the story? Now, I've only done that a couple of times. But most of the time I use fate points. But honestly, again, for new players, they don't need it. They really don't need it. And while I completely agree with what everyone's saying about, in fact, one of the reasons I like meta narrative currencies is because I think that, because at the end of the day, I am who I am, and I want to win my role-playing game. And now I've played with players in Fate who refuse to be compelled ever. Right? Ever. Yes. Now I'm curious. You say I've had many new players try to avoid a compel at all costs. When you say new players, Neutromancer, do you mean that they've never played any role-playing game before ever? Or do you mean people who play D&D and now they're playing a Fate? Because I have had players, and this is, by the way, with Fate points where you get a bribe and I'm giving you a point, and you need those meta currencies if you want to do something. I have played with existing players before in my own home games, and I've definitely had, I'd say 25 to 30% of my players bounce off of the idea of compels. Why would I want something bad to happen to my character? Of course I don't want anything bad to happen to my character. My character needs to win all the time. Why would I have something bad happen to me? And they just straight up refuse compels. I have only experienced that with people who come from a D&D video game, win the game type mindset. When I play with people who don't have those sort of preconceptions about this being a game that we have to win, I find that it isn't a problem. Now, as I've said before, I am who I am and I want to win my role-playing game, but I understand that in games like Fate, winning the role-playing game means accepting compels because I need fate points in order to be able to do the thing that I need to do. So fate and compels are a perfect example of where they work with a player like me who goes, I don't like the idea of a player, hamstringing themselves or handicapping themselves because it's the right thing to do for my character. And I know that for a lot of people, that's what role-playing games are. And to be clear, I like doing that too. but I like it when the game rewards me for that behavior rather than punishing me for that behavior, right? What gets rewarded gets repeated. So that works for me, but that's only because I'm a degenerate at the core of my being. I grew up playing D&D as kind of a competitive game, you know, where you were trying to beat the adventure or beat the dungeon or beat the monster or beat the villain. It was all about winning and not losing. And the idea of taking a negative or taking a loss, especially when it was voluntary, is something that, you know, would boggle the mind of younger Derik. Now, that being said, I like fate points. I like compel rules. I just don't necessarily know that you need them. I mean, you can play with them, but again, I don't know that you're needing them. I know this is kind of a hot take, but you know, it is what it is. Let's see here. Let's looking at the chat here. Let's see here. People talking about compels and not playing and all that other stuff. Beowulf says this was making me want to play so much right now. So now look, I have done the same too. I have paid with compels, but this first happened to me when I was explaining the game, and I realized that I was, you know, my player, I could read the room, and my players were already kind of at the verge of like, why this is kind of getting too complex for me. And I was like, the last thing I'm not going to drop fate points on them. I'm just going to go with it. And it worked out okay. Bernardo, why fate accelerated versus condensed? Well, the answer, Bernardo, really comes down to is approaches instead of skills. Condensed still uses skills. And I think for new players, and quite frankly, for the way that I prefer to play role-playing games mostly these days, I would prefer understanding how a character does something or why they do something rather than what can they do. And I like the simplistic nature of the stunts, the stress, the consequences, but most importantly, I really love the approaches. So yeah. So the last thing, like I said before, that is really a part of Fate is this idea of stunts. And stunts replaces the entire feat section of every single game that exists. Because what this does is it requires you to create a cool narrative element of your character. And it all follows the same formula. Because I am a smooth talker, so because I am this thing, or because I have this thing, or because I trained at this thing, because I'm this description, I get a +2 when I combine one of the 6 approaches, when I sneakily, when I cleverly, when I flashily, when I forcefully, right? So you combine one of the 6 approaches, 6, with one of the 4 different actions you can take in the game. You can create an advantage. You can overcome an obstacle. You can flashily attack. You can defend. So right off the bat, you have 24 different options, right? Because there's 6 approaches, there's 4 actions, so that's 24. So in theory, you're like, there's only 24, except the last thing, when I describe a circumstances. Okay? So you can't use this every time. I get a +2 bonus when I forcefully defend when I use my shield in close combat. If I'm not in close combat, or if I don't have my shield, I don't get to use this stunt, right? Because I am a smooth talker, I get a +2 bonus when I sneakily create advantages when I'm in conversation with someone. So if I'm trying to sneakily create an advantage by, sneaking into a facility and hacking the, or disabling the surveillance camera, I don't get a +2 bonus. Sure, I'm sneaking. Yes, I'm creating advantage, but I'm not in a conversation with someone. And that means that this stunt doesn't apply. So in a way, yes, these are like stunt Mad Libs, or another way to describe them is feat Mad Libs, right? And so, that's kind of why. Oh, yes. I'm sorry, John. Yes, I should say this. Yeah. The things that are in capitals are linking back to, an aspect on your character sheet. But it doesn't have to be an aspect. In fact, it says, because I describe some way that you are exceptional, have a cool bit of gear, or are otherwise optioned. But it doesn't specifically have to be a aspect, but generally speaking, I find that the two things kind of inform one another, and it tends to become something that, tends to kind of feed into one another. Someone will create a stunt, and then I'll say, oh, hey, because you're this thing, because I'm a great pilot, I get this thing. And I go, hey, great pilot sounds like it could be a cool aspect. Do you agree? And they go, yeah, that actually is a cool way. And then they kind of write it down on their character sheet. So it could be a nice way to get people to think about their aspects, but technically it does not have to be an aspect. It's capitalized because it looks cool. I agree. So I like stunts. And by the way, the game, you can have up to 6. It ties into your refresh, which I didn't even go over, but you can have 3 stunts for free. And the game recommends that you create one. And I always create one with a player because I want them to think about their characters and who they are and what they can do and what they can do better. But I leave the other 2 blank. And just like aspects, if somebody comes up with a cool idea for a stunt, or they do something and we're like, oh, that seems like something you should be able to do really well. They're like, yeah, I will let them basically retcon that they had the stunt and give them the +2 bonus after the fact. Just because it's, case. In fact, I remember there was an instance where if someone tags the same aspect like twice in a row and does the same action twice in a row to get +2 bonus, I basically go, hey, that might be a great stunt for your character. Seems like something that you really do a lot. Maybe this is a defining thing that your character does. And they go, oh, that's a cool idea. And then they'll write that down as a stunt. Retconning is part of the rule. Absolutely. Awesome. Yes. So the other stunts, to be honest with you, I like these. I really do like these. I tend not to use them as much in my sort of intro games only, just because this is a little bit more confusing in my experience for people who are brand new to the game. But these other stunts are basically things that let you once per game session do something really cool, kind of game breaking, kind of narrative bending, sort of steal control of the narrative a little bit. And these could be fine. I do tend to avoid these during first time go around games, but they can still be a very, very fun aspect to the game. And I definitely do like these kind of stunts. Again, milestones follow much the same advancement as other games, but when I'm using this, it's usually for a one shot. So I don't really worry about aspects, but again, they've got some information here about being the GM, how to build a scenario, make it a bad guy, give them a goal, make it something the PCs can't ignore, and you're off and running, right? And just kind of go back and forth. My goal in almost every one of these one-shots, depending on how much time I have available, is to run 3 to 5 scenes and then call it a quit. Give everybody a chance to do everything. They've got some information here. Oh, here we go. Optional rule, approach-related target numbers. Sometimes being careful makes things a lot easier. Sometimes it just takes too long. The GM can adjust the target number up or down by 1 or 2, depending on whether you think this approach that they chose is a problematic or fitting. This makes things a bit more complex, but for some groups, it's worth it. Now, I'm just sort of creating these target numbers in my head as we go along. Obviously, if you're an experienced GM, creating DCs or difficulty levels is pretty simple for you. But, generally speaking, I'm going to either basically go with 0, 1, or 2, and then I might adjust it depending on whether I think it's a good idea or a poor idea. Then they give you some great examples of characters at the end of the book. Here is somebody that's kind of kind of Avatar, The Last Airbender like. And here is kind of a Captain Swashbuckler type. And here is a definite Harry Potter ripoff clone. And here is sort of your crazy, weird spy tech kind of, not quite James Bond, but, kind of modern day espionage. And then they've got this really great quick reference here that really makes it easy for you, or I usually have just this. I don't even bring the book most of the time. I just bring, these 2 pages, and I'm pretty much good to go. And that's it. That's the whole game. And you got an index and a character sheet, and that is Fate Accelerated Edition. So it's a pretty simple game that, doesn't have a lot of, bells or whistles to it, but can be really, really powerful. And I think that it is by far and away, and I've used it, again, probably maybe a dozen times, to introduce play groups that have never played role-playing games before, haven't even really played, World of Warcraft or Baldur's Gate, 2, not 1, not 3, I should say, because this was in the past. But these are people who basically don't play role-playing games. And this, for me, this was the go-to system that I used to introduce them to it. And I think that for some groups who do not want that sort of deep mechanical crunch, I think this is all that they will ever need in a game. I honestly look most of the time at shows like Critical Role or Dimension 20, and I go, I don't know why they don't need all those rules. They really just need Fate. They probably, only need Fate Accelerated. To be honest with you, if they just want to get most of the rules kind of out of the way and have a very simple rules-lite approach. And yeah, if you're going to play a game for a long time, I think for most people, there is a desire to have a degree of rules complexity to it. But if you're only going to be playing a game for 3 sessions, 5 sessions, 10 sessions, I think Fate Accelerated is a great option. And again, for new players, and I said this way long time ago when I said PF2 versus 5e, which game should you play for new? I said neither. You should play Fate, specifically Fate Accelerated Edition, or Fae as it's called. In other words, there's finally a Fae that Derik likes. I think Fate Core and Fate Condensed are also fine. I just think that I really like the approach-based concept. It's one of the reasons I like Legend of the 5 Rings, 2D20, even Fabula Ultima, because they kind of got rid of traditional skills, or at the very least, they're really leaning more into how you do something or why you do something rather than, something else. Hey, Ben.
Bennett tipped $30 just to get us to our goal. I'm
Thank
all
you.
for more first looks and more system streams. P.S. Mithras, please.
Yeah, I honestly, Mithras is, maybe that's a great stream, Ben, where like, if we can figure out a way to get you and Donnie on the stream, look, Ben, you and I are easy, right? Not only is there flavor of the month, but, by the way, on this channel, like we're playing Root, on right now in our actual play, and we're more than halfway through. Our group is all super excited right now about Fabula Ultima. All of these games came from Ben. I just want to say this. But you and I are always on to the next thing, but for Donnie to be like super engaged and super excited about a game. I'm not trying to say that when you're excited about a game or when I'm excited about a game, that we should just ignore it, but let's call it what it is, right? Like, we get excited about a lot of games, but for Donnie to get excited, that's a big deal. So I definitely think, and I haven't looked at the game at all. So I think that might be a fun stream idea. And, I just, the other day there was a conversation about Mithras, I think going on other games chat. And I was like, I definitely need to get this game on the docket to take a look at it. So thank you for that tip. And I agree with you about Mithras. And yeah, plus, I love getting you and Donnie onto the show, and I think it's a I think it's a fun idea. We just got to make the schedules work, but I get that it's always a little bit more challenging, especially once everybody's back to school and stuff. But thank you, Ben. So yeah, look at that. Thanks for hanging out tonight. It's 8:55. We're pretty much done. We're going to wrap up here. I'm just going to answer any last chats, and then we're going to call it quits and let people get into their weekday. Let's see. We got a root stream on Tuesday. We're trying to figure out. There might be a Call of Cthulhu stream. We'll figure it out. To be determined. Where I go through Call of Cthulhu for the first time. Looking over my calendar over here. Next Monday is Labor Day. So I might have a long weekend. I'm going to try to get Friday off. So if that's the case, I'll have a 4-day weekend. That'd be pretty sweet. Yeah, I never understood why Critical Role just play Fate. Well, Bernardo, the answer is money. They like it and they want it, and D&D is huge. Did I miss the NightCon survey? Frosty, you did not. I started working on it. It's a Google form, and ended up getting busy yesterday, demolishing. The bathroom is demolished. Repairing the demolished bathroom and starting to put back lights and wiring and switches, and it took up pretty much my whole day, and I was exhausted, so did not get a chance to finish it. So I might try to finish it tonight after the stream, but it's going to be out ASAP because I do want to get that information. So, but yeah, Cypher I think would be a cool idea. Again, I mean, to be fair, Candela Obscura, definitely a very narrative game, and Daggerheart is still kind of a trad RPG, but it definitely has much stronger narrative elements, and I'm presuming that they're going to use that system for their future campaigns. So it could be that. Yeah, today it will be short. Faye has 47 pages, which is why we're done. Look, we went through the whole book. We got to talk about it. We went off topic, and it only took us 2 hours. So, but yeah, I agree that a lot of YouTube gamers are either just like ignoring this. It's like they're ignoring the system. They're going around the system. It's like, it'd be like if you really liked Call of Cthulhu, but you like the mechanics, you just didn't like horror or sanity or any of the other stuff, but you insisted on playing Call of Cthulhu because it was popular. You'd be like, this is stupid. There are other games. In fact, there are other games that use the same system that you should use because you don't need to do cosmic horror if you don't want to use cosmic horror. It is 9 p.m. Yeah, look, that's early for us, Ariel. That's early. But anyway, thank you for that. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up just cause it's Sunday and, I'll let everybody kind of enjoy here the rest, but, thanks for joining me. I thought this was only gonna be about an hour or so, but you guys had some good questions and some back and forth. And again, I think that, Fate is a fantastic introduction to role-playing games. I think it's a fun way to play the game. It's very narrative. It's very low simulationist, and it's pretty low gamist too. Frostjack, thank you for the final tip.
Frostjack tipped $5. I asked before, but the conversation about forcefully flying a ship before reminded me of a moment in a recent Star Wars story where a character used the Force to make a blind hyperspace jump. Clever, flashy, or something else?
Ooh. To make a blind... well, you know what? We'll do a final poll. All right. If a character made a blind hyperspace jump, would that be, do they have a list here? Would that be, well, it's definitely not careful, but assuming you were working within this framework, would it be clever, flashy, forceful, or quick? Again, I don't think it's particularly sneaky. Maybe it is sneaky. I don't know. But I know what I would pick. I'm just curious to see what everybody else picks here. John, thank you very much. just completing the other goal because I love Fate and I want to keep seeing it on the channel. Thank you, John, for that. Yeah. I think Fate is Fate is like one of those games that it's very simple and a lot of people could learn from it. It is not necessarily the game that everyone's going to play with, but everyone should play it. And I think that just because it's basic in some aspects doesn't mean that you should just ignore it as a game that can be that's what I'm looking for. Just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's basic. Does that make sense? Like you can't tell complex games and have complex stories with it. You absolutely can. It's just like a game like Othello or Go. Go is very, very, very simple, but obviously there's tremendous depth to a game like Go. And, I think that that's kind of what I feel about Fate. What is the GNS of Fate? Like 3 G score of like 2 or something of Fae specifically of Fae. Like 2 gamist, like 8 narrativist or something like that, maybe 9 narrativist, and then like simulationist might be like 0 or like 1 maybe at most. Like because in Fate you don't even necessarily have like if you want to do something you have to be able to invoke it. So if somebody's tripped and they have the aspect knocked on the ground, right, because you gave them that aspect through create an advantage, if it doesn't have any free invocations on it and you're out of Fate points, you can't take advantage of them being on the ground. So the simulation of them being on the ground doesn't actually exist. So I would say it's very low simulationist, very low. Yeah, aspects are always true. He's on the ground, John, but you're not going to get a +2 bonus to attack him, are you? No, you're only going to get that if you invoke it. Right. That's what I'm saying. I'm talking about the mechanical benefit of someone being, quote, prone. Yeah. Like, yeah, no. He is on the ground. It just doesn't mean anything to you mechanically unless you have Fate points, which is a narrative mechanic, not a simulations mechanic. In fact, the fact that whether or not you get a bonus to hit somebody on the ground depends on whether or not you've been accepting compels, not the fact that they're, at a disadvantaged combat perspective, means that it is very, 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 very almost negative simulationist. So yeah, Fate is an example of a very hyper-specific game. Very, very narrativist. Very low gamist, almost no simulationism. All right. The poll is, wow. That is interesting. Okay. The poll is 58% of people said flashy for the blind hyperspace jump. 23% said forceful. 11% said quick, and 5% said clever. I would have gone with quick. Like, because, you're quickly hitting a bunch of buttons and pushing the button. Like, to me, that felt like a very quick approach. Like, you're like, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to punch in as much as I can and go. So quick was where I felt like it was going with this. But I like the idea that flashy won. But you know what? Here's the thing. There's no right answer to this. There's no wrong answer to this. That's a conversation that would happen at your game table, and everyone would be like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's flashy. And it's like, sweet, I don't know. This is where also the motivation could come into things, right? Like, is this person doing it like with kind of a cocky attitude, like, never tell me the odds, kid, and then throws the switch? Okay, now I could see where that's flashy, right? Whereas if someone's just like, just give me 3 seconds, I'm going to do as much as I can and quickly throw it, that feels more like quick, right? So that's where, like, not just how you're doing it, but also like who is doing it and like what kind of style or do you have? I think that's kind of interesting. Tristan, yes, if you knock someone prone, you can get a free invoke on them on the target, but only the first time, right? And so that's where that's why I was saying, like, it is not a simulationist mechanic. The game does give you a little bit of a handout, but by and large, it is not simulationist, right? You don't even care about equipment or money, right? So it's very low simulationist. So there you go. G score of 2, maybe, or something like that. N score of, 9. It's not 10 because the game isn't literally just about storytelling, but it's pretty close. And S score of like 0. or 1. So very, very hyper specific game. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'll see you Tuesday. We're going to be back for Root. God help me. Those guys, they've gone off the deep end. I've created a monster. We'll see what happens. That is the true definition of play to find out what happens. I have no fucking idea. All right, everybody. I will see you Tuesday for Root. Keeping your eyes peeled for some future streams. Looks like we've got some other games to talk about. Call of Cthulhu's coming soon. I really want to get Mithras on here. I have more to talk about Fabula Ultima. We've got a new is it this week? Yeah, this week we've got Paizo releasing information about the playtest for their next 2 classes. So there might be a stream for that because I'm interested to see what they're going to do. So we've got some Pathfinder 2 stuff. We got some Call of Cthulhu stuff. We got some Fabula Ultima stuff. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about and Root. So hopefully you join us. If not, maybe you can catch a future stream, but like and subscribe and click the bell so that you know when we do go live, especially for these Sunday streams, which you might otherwise miss. And of course, thank you again to all of our patrons, folks like John and Ben and Frostjack and GM Scott and, Sean, Clay. We've got so many people today. I might have missed a couple people, but we had a bunch of patrons in here tonight, tipping, supporting me, supporting this channel, supporting Bob, supporting Smith. Love having everybody here. They really make this whole thing possible. And that's why I can talk about Fate Accelerated Edition instead of D&D 5th Edition. So if you like Fate Accelerated Edition and Call of Cthulhu and Mithras and 2D20 and Fabula Ultima, and you don't want just another D&D channel, thank you for your support. I will see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Bye, everybody. Peace. Peace. I need you more.